In the forgotten corners of New England, where autumn mist clings to weathered stone and centuries-old secrets refuse to stay buried, stands the ruins of what was once called a sanctuary for the lost. The Crowley Orphanage operated for 31 years from 1881 to 1912, housing over 400 children who had nowhere else to go. But here's what the historical records don't tell you. Not a single child who entered those doors was ever seen again as an adult. No marriage certificates. No death records. No trace of existence beyond those walls. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another ghost story. It's a documented investigation that spans over a century, involving government cover-ups, occult practices, and evidence so disturbing that it was deliberately buried in classified archives. The truth about what happened to those 400 children will change everything you thought you knew about evil. Stay with me until the end, because the final revelation about Beatrice Crowley and her family will leave you questioning the very nature of humanity itself. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. Chapter 1: The Orphanage's Origin. The year was 1881. America was healing from the wounds of civil war, and the Industrial Revolution had left countless children orphaned in its wake. It was during this time of great need that Beatrice Crowley emerged as what appeared to be an angel of mercy. Beatrice had suffered her own tragedy just 2 years prior. Her only daughter, Margaret, had perished in a house fire that consumed their Boston estate. Witnesses described Beatrice's screams as otherworldly, a sound that seemed to echo from somewhere far deeper than grief. The fire investigators found something peculiar. Margaret's body was discovered in the basement, though the fire had started on the second floor. More disturbing still, she appeared to have been arranged in a ritualistic position, arms crossed, surrounded by strange symbols carved into the wooden floor. Instead of retreating into mourning, Beatrice channeled her loss into what she called her divine calling. Using her considerable inheritance, she purchased 200 acres of remote land in rural Massachusetts and constructed what would become known as the Crowley Orphanage for Lost Children. The building itself was a marvel, 3 stories of pristine Victorian architecture, complete with modern amenities that were luxurious by 1880s standards. Running water, electric lighting, and a state-of-the-art kitchen facility. But it was the chapel that drew the most attention. Built into the foundation of the main building, it featured elaborate stained glass windows depicting scenes that weren't quite biblical. Local craftsmen later reported that Beatrice had insisted on specific modifications to traditional religious imagery, angels with too many eyes, saints with obscured faces, and symbols that predated Christianity by millennia. The first children arrived in October 1881. Local newspapers praised Beatrice's humanitarian efforts, noting how well-dressed and healthy the children appeared during their rare public appearances. The Crowley Orphanage quickly gained a reputation for its revolutionary approach to childcare. Visitors reported seeing children engaged in what appeared to be advanced educational activities, studying languages that seemed far too complex for their ages, performing in theatrical productions with an almost supernatural level of coordination. What made the orphanage particularly noteworthy was its adoption program. Beatrice claimed to have connections with wealthy families across New England who were eager to provide homes for deserving children. The adoption process was remarkably efficient, sometimes taking less than a week from initial inquiry to placement. Prospective parents praised Beatrice's thorough screening process, though none could later recall the specific details of their interviews. Local records show that between 1881 and 1912, the Crowley Orphanage facilitated over 300 adoptions. The children were said to be perfectly behaved, highly intelligent, and adaptable to their new families. Letters of gratitude poured in from adoptive parents, all following a remarkably similar format, expressing amazement at how quickly the children integrated into their new lives, how they seemed to understand complex household routines without instruction, and how they displayed an almost uncanny ability to anticipate their new parents' needs. But there were whispers. Local merchants noted that food deliveries to the orphanage were surprisingly small for an institution housing 40 to 60 children at any given time. The town doctor, Dr. Edwin Marsh, mentioned in his personal diary that despite multiple requests, he was never allowed to conduct routine health examinations of the children. When pressed, Beatrice would explain that the children had their own private physician, though no one in the surrounding towns had ever met this mysterious doctor. Perhaps most telling were the observations of Sarah Thompson, a local woman who cleaned the orphanage twice weekly. In a letter to her sister, dated March 1884, she wrote, "The children are always so quiet, almost too quiet. They move through the halls like they're floating. And their eyes? There's something old in their eyes, like they've seen things children shouldn't see. Sometimes I catch them staring at me and I get the strangest feeling they can see right through to my soul. The orphanage operated without incident for over 3 decades, a model institution by all public accounts. But in 1912, everything changed. On a cold November morning, concerned neighbors noticed that no smoke was rising from the orphanage chimneys. When local authorities arrived for a welfare check, they found the building completely empty. Not just of people, but of everything. Furniture, clothing, personal belongings, even the kitchen supplies had vanished overnight. The only things left behind were the architectural features that couldn't be moved, and dozens of photographs carefully arranged on the chapel altar. Chapter 2. The Photos That Never Aged. Dr. Margaret Chin never expected her sabbatical research project to become a descent into documented madness. The Harvard historian had come to the abandoned Crowley site in 2019, drawn by a footnote in a 19th-century social welfare study. What she discovered in the chapel basement would challenge everything she thought she knew about photography, time, and the nature of reality itself. The photographs had been perfectly preserved despite over a century of New England weather penetrating the deteriorating building. 67 individual portraits, each measuring exactly 8 by 10 inches, arranged in precise rows on what had once been the chapel's altar. But it was when Dr. Chin began cataloging the images that she noticed the first impossibility. Every single photograph appeared to have been taken in identical lighting conditions. Not similar lighting, identical. The shadows fell at precisely the same angles, the contrast levels were uniform, and the photographic grain patterns were indistinguishable. This would have been challenging enough for a modern photographer with digital equipment, but for 1880s photography, it was technically impossible. The children in the photographs ranged in apparent age from perhaps 6 to 16 years old. Each was dressed in the same style of clothing, a simple dark uniform with white collar, and positioned in an identical pose, seated in a wooden chair, hands folded in lap, eyes staring directly into the camera. But their expressions. Dr. Chen would later write in her research notes, their faces hold an awareness that seems incompatible with childhood innocence. It's as if they're not just looking at the camera, but through it, directly at whoever would eventually view these images. The dating proved even more disturbing. Based on clothing styles, photographic techniques, and chemical analysis of the paper and developing compounds, the images span the entire operational period of the orphanage, from 1881 to 1912. Yet every child appeared to have been photographed on the same day in the same room with the same equipment. The photographic paper showed no signs of aging variation. The chemical signatures were identical across all 67 images. Dr. Chen's breakthrough came when she examined the photographs under ultraviolet light. Hidden within the emulsion of each image were symbols that weren't visible to the naked eye. Not random marks or photographic artifacts, but deliberate engravings etched into the negative before printing. The symbols appeared to be a combination of ancient runic scripts and geometric patterns that predated known writing systems. Working with Dr. James Kellerman, a specialist in historical linguistics from Brown University, Dr. Chin began documenting and translating the hidden markings. What they found suggested a systematic cataloging system. Each child's photograph contained a unique identifier symbol, followed by what appeared to be coordinates, and finally, a marking that Dr. Kellerman tentatively translated as prepared or ready. But the most disturbing discovery came when Dr. Chin began analyzing the arrangement patterns of the photographs themselves. The 67 images weren't randomly placed on the altar. They formed specific geometric configurations that corresponded to celestial arrangements. When mapped against astronomical charts, the positioning matched the locations of various star constellations during significant dates throughout the orphanage's operation. Further analysis revealed that the photographs could be grouped into sets of 7, with each group corresponding to a different celestial event: winter solstices, lunar eclipses, and other astronomical phenomena that occurred during the orphanage's 31-year operation. This suggested that the photographing of children was tied to a specific astronomical calendar, and that someone had been planning these sessions years, possibly decades, in advance. The most chilling aspect of Dr. Chen's research emerged when she attempted to cross-reference the children in the photographs with the orphanage's adoption records. She had access to the names of 312 children who had reportedly been adopted from the Crowley facility. Yet when she showed the photographs to forensic age progression specialists and compared them against any available documentation of the adopted children, there were no matches. Even more disturbing, several local historians provided Dr. Chen with family photographs from the era. Images of children who had lived in the surrounding communities during the orphanage's operation. 3 of the children in the Crowley photographs appeared to match local children who had never been orphaned, never been associated with the institution, and who had lived full lives in their own families. This led Dr. Chin to a horrifying possibility: the children in the photographs might not have been orphans at all. They might have been local children who had disappeared over the course of 3 decades, their absences explained away or simply forgotten in an era before modern record-keeping and communication systems. Her final discovery came when she examined the back of each photograph. In faded pencil, barely visible even under magnification, were single words written in what appeared to be Beatrice Crowley's handwriting. Not names or dates, but single descriptive terms: vessel, gateway, anchor, bridge. Each child had been assigned a specific role or function in whatever system Beatrice had been operating. Dr. Chen's research report, filed with Harvard University in March 2020, concluded with a recommendation that the site be subjected to archaeological investigation. She wrote, "The photographic evidence suggests that the Crowley Orphanage was not a childcare facility, but rather a sophisticated operation designed to catalog and prepare children for unknown purposes. The systematic nature of the documentation, combined with the impossible technical achievements of the photography, indicates capabilities that exceed our understanding of 19th-century technology and social organization." The investigation she recommended would never take place. 3 weeks after submitting her report, Dr. Margaret Chin disappeared while conducting follow-up research at the Crowley site. Her rental car was found in the orphanage's overgrown driveway, engine still running, driver's door open. The photographs she had been studying were gone. Chapter 3: The Message Under the Altar. Tommy Rodriguez and Kyle Morrison weren't looking for ghosts when they broke into the abandoned Crowley Orphanage on Halloween night, 2021. The urban exploration duo had documented dozens of abandoned buildings across New England, building a modest YouTube following with their respectful approach to historical sites. But what they discovered beneath the chapel would transform them from casual explorers into reluctant witnesses to something far more sinister than either had imagined. The chapel had been their primary target from the beginning. Kyle, an architecture student at Worcester Polytechnic, had been fascinated by historical accounts of the building's unique design features. The plan was simple: document the interior architecture, capture some atmospheric shots for their channel, and leave the site undisturbed. They had no idea that Dr. Chen's research had identified the chapel as the epicenter of the orphanage's mysterious activities. It was Tommy who first noticed the acoustic anomaly. As they were setting up their equipment, he observed that certain areas of the chapel produced distinct echo patterns that didn't match the room's architectural layout. Being an audio engineering major, he suggested they map the acoustic properties systematically. Using a technique called impulse response testing, they began documenting how sound traveled through different sections of the chapel. The area behind the altar produced readings that defied explanation. Sound seemed to disappear into the stone wall, as if there was a void beyond the visible architecture. Kyle's architectural training told him this was impossible. The chapel was built into the building's foundation with solid earth on all sides. Yet their equipment consistently indicated a large empty space directly behind the altar wall. Their breakthrough came when Kyle noticed that one section of the altar's carved stonework didn't quite align with the rest. What appeared to be decorative religious imagery was actually a cleverly disguised mechanical system. When pressure was applied to specific symbols in the correct sequence, the entire altar shifted forward on hidden rollers, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into complete darkness. The staircase was carved directly from bedrock, with walls that showed tool marks indicating construction techniques far more sophisticated than anything available in the 1880s. The steps were worn smooth in the center, suggesting decades of regular use. More disturbing were the symbols carved into the walls at regular intervals, the same geometric patterns that Dr. Chen had discovered hidden in the orphanage photographs. At the bottom of the stairs, approximately 30 feet below the chapel floor, they found a circular chamber that defied architectural logic. The room was perfectly round, with a domed ceiling that rose to a height that should have intersected with the chapel above. Yet somehow, the space existed independently of the building's foundation. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with carved Latin text, interrupted at regular intervals by complex diagrams that resembled astronomical charts mixed with anatomical drawings. Tommy's Latin studies from high school allowed him to translate fragments of the text. What he read sent chills through both explorers. The writings described something called the Great Translation, a process by which human consciousness could be transferred from one vessel to another. The text detailed specific requirements. The vessel must be young, uninitiated, and prepared through a series of ritualistic processes that included dietary restrictions, sensory deprivation, and exposure to celestial harmonies. In the center of the chamber sat a stone pedestal supporting a leather-bound ledger. The book was remarkably well preserved, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting in multiple languages. The entries were organized chronologically, beginning in 1881 and ending in November 1912. Each entry contained a child's name, age, physical description, and a date marked as either recruited or translated. Of the 423 children listed in the ledger, 312 were marked as recruited, matching exactly the number of reported adoptions from the orphanage. The remaining 111 were marked as translated, with additional notes describing their successful integration with designated vessels. The final entries, dated just days before the orphanage's mysterious abandonment, indicated that the Great Translation Project had been completed successfully. But it was the final section of the chamber that provided the most disturbing evidence. Along one wall, they discovered what appeared to be a primitive surgical facility. Stone tables with restraint systems, metal instruments that bore no resemblance to 19th-century medical equipment, and most horrifying of all, a collection of glass containers filled with preserved organic matter that defied identification. Tommy's audio equipment began picking up sounds that weren't audible to human ears, subsonic frequencies that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. When he played back the recordings at normal speed, the sounds resolved into what could only be described as voices. Dozens of voices, overlapping and indistinct, speaking in languages that predated recorded history. Kyle's architectural analysis of the chamber revealed construction techniques that incorporated principles of acoustic engineering and electromagnetic field manipulation that wouldn't be understood by mainstream science for another century. The room appeared to be designed as a massive resonance chamber, capable of generating specific frequency patterns that could affect human brain activity. Their most significant discovery came when they found Beatrice Crowley's personal journal, hidden in a sealed alcove behind the surgical area. The journal detailed her actual purpose for establishing the orphanage. She hadn't been trying to help orphan children. She had been collecting vessels for an ancient consciousness that had contacted her following her daughter's death. According to the journal, the fire that killed Margaret hadn't been an accident. It had been a summoning ritual that went catastrophically wrong, opening a connection to what Beatrice described as the ancients, entities that existed outside normal space and time. These beings required human vessels to interact with the physical world, but the transfer process was fatal to adult hosts. Only children possessed the neuroplasticity necessary to survive the consciousness transplantation. The adoptive families were revealed to be cultists who had agreed to raise the transplanted entities, providing them with human identities and integration into society. The children's uncanny behavior and advanced capabilities weren't signs of good education. They were evidence of ancient intelligences operating in young human bodies. The journal's final entry, dated November 15, 1912, read, "The great work is complete. 111 of the ancients now walk among humanity, indistinguishable from natural humans. They will grow, learn, and integrate until the time comes for the next phase. The bloodlines have been established. The future is secured. I go now to join my daughter in the space between spaces, content that I have served my purpose." Tommy and Kyle's exploration ended abruptly when their equipment detected approaching footsteps in the stairwell above them. They had been in the chamber for over 6 hours, though it felt like minutes. As they quickly gathered their equipment and documentation, Tommy noticed that the voices in his audio recordings had grown clearer, more insistent. They emerged from the chamber to find the chapel filled with figures dressed in modern clothing but standing in perfect formation around the altar. The figures didn't acknowledge their presence, instead beginning a low chant in the same ancient language they had heard in the underground recordings. Tommy and Kyle fled the building, but not before Kyle managed to photograph the assembled group. Later analysis of the photographs revealed faces that appeared in newspaper society pages, corporate executive portraits, and political campaign materials spanning the past century. Some of the individuals appeared to be the same age in photographs taken decades apart. The implications were staggering. The entities transplanted at the Crowley Orphanage had not only survived, but had infiltrated positions of power and influence throughout New England society. Tommy and Kyle posted their findings online, but within hours their social media accounts were suspended, their website was taken down, and both received visits from individuals claiming to be federal investigators. The documentation they had gathered disappeared from their equipment, though Tommy had managed to hide backup copies in a safety deposit box. 3 months later, Both young men were found dead in what authorities ruled a murder-suicide. The safety deposit box was found empty, its contents removed by someone with legitimate access credentials. The only trace of their discovery was a brief news report about two urban explorers who had died in a tragic incident while trespassing on private property. Chapter 4: The Buried Report. The truth about the Crowley Orphanage nearly surfaced in 1934, buried not by supernatural forces but by the calculated decisions of powerful men who understood that some secrets are too dangerous for public consumption. The classified investigation, marked Project Nightingale in federal archives, was conducted by a joint task force whose findings were so disturbing that the entire operation was disavowed and its participants sworn to silence. Agent Robert Morrison assembled a team that included Dr. Elena Vasquez, a forensic anthropologist, Major William Hayes from Army Intelligence, and Dr. Charles Whitman, a specialist in abnormal psychology. Their mission was to determine whether criminal activity had occurred at the Crowley site following reports of strange lights, unexplained sounds, and disappearances of individuals who had ventured onto the property. The team's first shock came when they excavated areas identified as potential burial sites. Ground-penetrating radar had indicated numerous anomalies consistent with human remains throughout the property. However, they found only carefully arranged clothing and personal effects, preserved as if their owners had simply vanished from within them. Dr. Vasquez's analysis revealed that the fabrics had been treated with preservation compounds that wouldn't be developed until the 1920s, despite dating from the 1880s. The clothing showed no decomposition despite being buried for over 20 years. More puzzling, the garments retained the exact body measurements of their former wearers, as if invisible forms still occupied them. Major Hayes focused on connections between the orphanage and adoptive families. His research uncovered a network linked by membership in an organization called the Order of the Eternal Dawn. Founded in Boston in 1847, the order included judges, politicians, business leaders, and academics throughout New England. More disturbing was the discovery that they had been actively recruiting children from families facing financial crises. Dr. Whitman's psychological evaluation of surviving order members yielded the most disturbing findings. Through interviews conducted under the pretense of a sociological study, he documented behavior patterns suggesting profound conditioning. The subjects displayed complete loyalty to the order's objectives, demonstrated advanced knowledge of subjects they claimed never to have studied, and exhibited compartmentalized personalities that activated under specific circumstances. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Agent Morrison discovered Beatrice Crowley's correspondence with order leadership. The letters, written in English and coded symbols, detailed a project far more ambitious than simple child trafficking. Beatrice had convinced the order that she had made contact with intelligences from the spaces between reality, entities that possessed knowledge that could revolutionize human civilization. According to the correspondence, these entities required human hosts to interact with the physical world, but possession was fatal to mature nervous systems. Only children between 6 and 16 possessed the neurological flexibility to survive consciousness transfer. The orphanage had been established as a facility for identifying suitable candidates and preparing them for transplantation. The adoption program was revealed to be a distribution network, placing possessed children with order families who would raise them while providing ongoing support for the entities inhabiting their bodies. The children's remarkable intelligence wasn't good education. It was evidence of ancient consciousnesses with access to knowledge accumulated over millennia. The team's most chilling discovery came when they located the order's current headquarters, disguised as a private club in Boston's financial district. Surveillance revealed that the organization had expanded significantly, with membership including prominent figures in government, industry, and academia throughout the northeastern United States. Major Hayes's intelligence analysis suggested that the order had successfully placed possessed individuals in positions of influence throughout American society. The entities had spent decades integrating into human civilization, learning to mimic human behavior while pursuing objectives that served their own species' interests. Agent Morrison interviewed a former order member who had suffered a psychological breakdown. The individual, identified as Subject 7, claimed that consciousness transfer hadn't ended with the orphanage's closure. The order had developed new methods for acquiring hosts, systematically targeting children from troubled families who were unlikely to be missed. Subject 7 described witnessing procedures where human consciousness was completely displaced by alien intelligence, leaving no trace of the original personality. The possessed individuals retained all memories and behavioral patterns, making detection impossible. Dozens of transfers had been conducted throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. The investigation faced an unprecedented dilemma when they discovered that several high-ranking government officials were suspected of being possessed entities. How could they expose a conspiracy that included members of the very institutions responsible for national security? The decision was made to classify the entire investigation. The final piece of evidence was a letter discovered in Beatrice Crowley's personal effects, written before her 1912 disappearance. Addressed to those who come after, it served as both confession and warning. I believed I was serving a divine purpose when I opened my doors to the ancients. I was a fool. The beings I invited into our world see humanity not as partners, but as resources to be harvested. They seek only to establish themselves in our reality, using our bodies as vessels. I have enabled an invasion that may not be realized for generations, but the seeds have been planted. May God forgive me for what I have unleashed upon the world. Project Nightingale was officially closed in January 1935. Agent Morrison died in a car accident 3 months later. Dr. Vasquez disappeared while conducting research in South America. Major Hayes was killed in World War II, and Dr. Whitman spent his final years in a psychiatric facility, claiming he was being stalked by individuals who looked exactly like people he had interviewed decades earlier but hadn't aged a day. The invasion began not with ships or armies, but with the systematic replacement of human consciousness. According to the classified documents, it succeeded beyond the invaders' wildest expectations.